All right, finally, we're going to go ahead and comp our actual actor on here. So I'm going to go ahead and do File, Import, and bring in our Passes Plates SHA-2 Proxy Targa file. And here is our actor. And let's go ahead and do a few things. One, we need to resize him so we can come back here and grab our original resize because he's still at 1280 or 1920 by 1080. So we'll go ahead and resize him first. Now he's shrunk down. Next thing we want to do is go ahead and add a color correct. So I'll go ahead and come in here under the CC Basics, add that. And we're also going to add an edge tool, so I got to go to my pick list under alpha and choose edge. Now with that said, I'll go ahead and start plugging these in. Output to edge, edge to a blend and comp. So I'll go ahead and add our blend and comp here. And here is our back, and here is our front. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. We've got a pretty harsh edge, so we want to fix that. So the first thing we can do is come to our edge, under edge, and enable shrink, erode, and blur, and it'll like blur around the edges and so forth. So everything is looking really, really nice. Now, as far as the actual color, we know that he comes under this harvester, so he has to get darker. So what we can do is we can keyframe a couple things, usually just the midtones and the gain itself. So at frame 41, I'm going to go ahead and right-click and say Set Keyframe for frame 41, and I'm going to use my little step forward one frame and wait until I'm officially in shadow here. And then I'm going to actually turn on auto key, and we're going to go ahead and bring this down until he's in a dark situation. There we go. So negative 0.8. So let's go ahead and move forward here. And this is going to start calculating a little bit. And we're going to have to get to frame 70 here before he's officially out of the shadow. So I'll kind of come in here. So here's frame 75. And let's just backtrack a little. This is the wonderful thing about the Roto Brush in After Effects. We can get the entire actor. It's really amazing. So we're looking at a frame of around 70 when he emerges from all this. So at frame 70, we're going to go ahead. Actually, 71 looks good. And we'll right-click and say Set Keyframe. So we're resetting another 0.8, negative 0.8. And then a couple frames in, let's go ahead and move forward a couple frames. Wait till he gets into the broad light again here. And I'm guessing probably around 75. We'll get him back. And we'll go ahead and set this back to a proper gamma with auto key on to 1. So he's brightened again. So if we kind of come through here, we can kind of see when he's in and under it, he's darkened. And if we come over here a little bit farther. So now our actor is in place. Everything is looking good. If we want to color correct him individually, we can also come in here and maybe adjust his gamma if he's too bright. And let's go ahead and group this, and we'll just call this foreground actor. All right, last thing we need to deal with is this shovel that goes and crosses over our actor. Right now our actor is in the foreground element. We need to have this shovel cross over him. So we're going to do a little quick trick here. I'm going to take my blend and comp, put it right here. I'm going to take this as my last output to the back, and to the foreground, we're going to go all the way back to where the background element and the foreground element gets merged into one. And I want to take this convert depth and basically place this on top of it. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this, if I can get a hold of it, all the way over and set this for the front. So now when we look at this, we have the actual actor crossed in front. But we don't want to have this all through the shot because when the next harvesters come around, they will be in front of our actor. So we have to set this to a keyframe. So at frame 26 is where it just comes close to hitting him. As you can see here, part of this right here is off because he is now being casted on top of or behind this harvester. So what we can do is, with the blend and comp, we can come under the opacity and set a keyframe. So what I'll do is I'll set this to 0 so that there's no comp on top, and I'm going to go ahead and say set keyframe. I'm going to move one frame forward, and with my auto key on, I'll set this up to 1 now. So now he's being masked. So I'm going to go ahead and jump up to frame 34, because I know that is the frame where the shovel is about to end. And I'm going to go ahead and set a key here. So I'm going to say set keyframe. And I'll move one frame forward, and we're going to revert back. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to 0. So if I turn off auto key and go to animation, you can see the animation of the opacity here. If you want to, you can take these keys and you can make them linear if you want. So now, as you can see, when we cross over into the middle here, the actor is properly occluded. And when we move on to further scenes, the actual harvester is now in the background and the actor is in the foreground. So let's go ahead and finish this off by connecting it to our output. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and run back to the areas that are turned off now, which is our depth of field blur. Go ahead and turn that on, and our motion blur under vectors. So now everything is proper. And now comes the process of tweaking this out so that everything looks correct.
All right, now we're going to go ahead and tweak this scene out. Just to let you know, if you put your cursor over here on the view window and you hold down your middle mouse button and tap it and push down to player options, there's a couple of proxy scales if you want to scale down for quicker playback. And I'll show you, it doesn't really work that well, but it's good enough if you're trying to just get a rough idea. So right here, if I want to, I can turn off some information here as far as view mode, depth. You know, maybe I just want time on there, like what frame. So this is a nice display option. And if we put this to something like quarter, you'll see it start to really scale down. But if we press play, you'll get a little faster feedback. Not much. And that is the one thing that kind of puts this program behind such programs as Nuke and Shake, is that playback can sometimes be a little bit slow. Now, it's also slow in programs like Nuke because of all of the computations that have to go on through this. But again, that's just a problem that occurs with compositing with huge pipelines, especially adding motion blurs, which doesn't really help. So to get a faster feedback, you might want to disable all your motion blurs. And usually your depth of field and motion blurs are what are causing the lag down, and you'll have a pretty fast feedback. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that I'm just set to full because I want to look at the full detail here. And what I want to do first is go ahead and do an actual render so that we can take a look at it inside of FCheck. So if I go under my actual output node, I'll double click it. And here is my render. So I have my output, what I'm outputting to. And I first want to make sure my depth is set to 8 because I don't want to go back to 32. It'd be a waste of space. And under my render is where I actually set where the file is going to go to. I'm going to choose JPEG. And if you want, you can put a gamma adjust on here. For the file name, I'll go ahead and click the folder here. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and jump under here and come to Final Image Sequences and hit OK. And what that does is it puts it under Final Image Sequences, version, output name, frame number. I want to change this little render token here to say something like shot to finished. And I'll leave that dot right there so that it just gives me the frame number. Now, usually you can go in different places to do renders, but the best place to go for the render is right up here under File, Render. And as you can see, it tells you what frame range we're doing, 1 to 341, which is the amount of frames that are in this shot. And let's go ahead and do a render, and we'll take a look at it to do some tweaks. All right, I went ahead and FCheck and loaded up the image sequence by loading in the very first image. And as we can see right here that the depth of field is too much. And how do I know that? Well, you can see right here that the ground next to this blurry area is still in focus, while this is way out of focus. So we overdialed the depth of field. You can see our depth of field focal plane was adjusted to about this far from the camera where the tires were, because we put a little dabber there, as you remember, with our depth of field blur. And as we approach it, yeah, right now it's in focus, but right now before it, it's not in focus. So it's too much. If we look at our scene, this was shot in broad blasting daylight. The depth of field was very little, or the lack of depth of field, so there shouldn't be a lot of shallow areas, and we know that by looking at the trees back here and seeing that they are in focus. So as we kind of move through the shot, everything looks good as far as the shadow on the actor, and here we can really see the depth of field killing us here, because this object should not be out of focus this much, and the trees in the background be more in focus. As you go farther from the camera, things should be more and more out of focus. So again, we're going to dial that down a little bit. You can see it really being affected here. And the order at which this actual grenade launcher hits should be put in front of the explosion and not behind it. But because it gets blasted out, I'm not going to change that. So what we have in the order now as far as stacking is first the smoke, then the explosion on top of it. So actually this little smoke trail is actually behind the explosion, but we can't really tell. So I'm just going to leave it be. Again, the color correction looks good. It seems a little bit too saturated, so I might want to bring that down and adjust the color. You can see a nice little highlight here coming in as far as reflections, and that helps from our spec kick. And I can also, if I want to, darken up these little dust trails a little bit. And everything else looks pretty good, and I'm very happy with it.
Again, because the depth of field is so high, I'm getting this weird outline from the explosion cutout mask from our explosion layer. So again, I can kind of look down here and say, okay, there's something going on here. As far as the dust, it's a little too bright. So these are just things that we can take into account and move into the comp and do the fix. All right, so here we are in SHOT2_comp12, and I'll go ahead and hold down 1 and click on the last output node so we can get an idea as far as what we need to fix here. The first thing, of course, is that depth of field, so I'll go ahead and come down here and take a look. So let's go ahead and come up here, take a look at our depth of field, and here's our depth of field blur. See how everything is nicely labeled so we can figure out where everything is at and how to do it. So my X radius, again, I want the focal plane to be about here. I'm going to bring this down to maybe 2. And that right there is maybe a little too much, so maybe 1.5. And let's not judge this just by this shot right here. Let's go ahead and move forward a little bit and see what happens. As we go through the shot, we can kind of start judging, okay, does this look like it's properly depth of field out? We can see things are pretty blurry here. And we can probably dial this down maybe just a little bit. 1.2 probably is good enough. And now we're actually in focus as far as the out of focusness of matching the ground to the actual harvester. So it's really starting to look like it's there. Again, we can take a look at this one right here and see. Now, these ground particles, let's go ahead and take care of those. So let's come down to our particles, which is way down here. And we can do a couple things here. We could come in and do a color correction, or we can just do a general opacity on them. And I think I'm just going to do just a touch of a general opacity takedown here. So just a little bit. So we're at like a 0.7. So it's not too in your face, but it is there. It's a very subtle dust. Again, if I wanted to change the color of this, I could do the offset with an actual CC Basics if I wanted to add that in, but I'm not going to do that. So let's go ahead and kind of head back to the beginning a little bit here. And just kind of wait a minute here. I'm a little concerned about the brightness of the actual harvester and its sort of saturation. This is a very old looking harvester, yet it has a very candy kind of brightness, almost like it came right out of the shop. And I want to kind of dull that down a little bit so it's not too intense. So if I come over here to the CC body and come over here to the saturation, we can start to dial down the saturation a little bit so it doesn't look so perfectly rugged. I don't want to take all the color out because then it'll look really, really dull, but just enough so that it's just kind of the subtleness. And I see 0.8 seems to be a good kind of number. This general scene isn't super vibrant. I mean, it's a little bit vibrant down here, but I want to have some dullness in the actual saturation here. Okay, so with that said, let's go ahead and look at the gamma and the gain. The gamma is kind of like a darkening, but still staying contrasty. The gain is sort of like a general darkening in the sense that you milkify the whites. In other words, you have like blacks, whites just go to black. It's a very nasty sort of darkening, and it's a very bleached way of brightening. So gamma is kind of a way of maintaining those saturation or those contrast issues while bringing down the brightness. So depending on what you want to do, you really don't want to push gain too much. So I'll go ahead and just show you a little bit of that, bring that down just a touch. I'll start to see the difference here. You can see how everything, if I bring it all the way down, it really starts to milkify the image. It really loses the highlights, so to speak. So I'll go ahead and leave that probably at something like 0.95. But the gamma, I'll show you what that does. It's more of an intense kind of, it still maintains the highlights as you bring down the brightness. So again, I don't want to go crazy with that, so I'll probably put that at maybe 0.98. And let's go ahead and just kind of move through the shot here and see how this all looks. All right, looking good. I might want to do a little tweaks to the tires as far as their brightness is concerned. And I think I'm pretty happy with that. What I'm going to do now is move on to the actual glass that's up in the top. And there's only a few shots where we actually see the glass, like right here. And if I go to my glass, which is right here, and I just come in and adjust the gain or gamma for the master. Let's just start dialing that down a little bit. So there we get a nice darkening, so it's not so bright. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now it's nicely darkened and it looks really good. Now, as far as the tires are concerned, let's take a little glimpse of the tires. They might be a little too dark. So what I might want to do is increase the gain or the gamma. I'm going to probably increase the gain a little bit, just a general brightening, just a touch. And let's go ahead and come to the explosion.
And if I come over to the explosion itself, that's way down the line over here, I can come to the blend and comp and do a couple things. One of which is just, in general, I'd probably just stick with a little bit of an opacity drop, just so that it kind of blends into the shot a little bit, just a touch. And I got that at 0.91. We can see if we kind of go through this, we can still see the harvester back there, kind of in travail. And that maybe is a little too much. Like I told you before, a general opacity transparency usually looks a little bit fake, but just to add a little bit of it and so forth. The other thing we could do is add a actual macro in here and build a light wrap in the same way we built the light wrap for the actual harvester. But I'm not really too crazy about that right now. It makes a real subtle difference. What really works, again, is getting explosions from stock footage and putting them in here, which I plan to do in a future tutorial. Again, I don't have stock footage myself. We tried to go through Video Copilot. They were very nice, but just told us that they have copyright issues with us putting that on here. So we were pretty much stuck with an explosion using the fluid effects in Maya. So with all of that said, trying to think of anything else that we can probably go with here. And for the heck of it, I'm just going to go back to frame 1, or roughly around frame 1, frame 8 here, and just see if there's anything in the beginning of the shot that kind of gives itself away and so forth. And I think we're really good. It's looking very nice. So let's go ahead and save this, and we'll go ahead and do a render. All right, so let's take a look at what we got. And I'm actually very happy with everything. You might not notice the motion blur at first, and I'm just going to show you as we kind of run through the shot. It's a very subtle thing, both depth of field and motion blur. It's not something you want to abuse. And I'll show you where the motion blur is. As you can see, we get a little bit of a whip pan right here, and you can see the motion blur taking in effect on the harvester here. So if I definitely see it right here, it's kind of taking in effect the same blur. And again, we're just matching with what we see in the foreground or background to the blur of the actual objects that are CG'd in. So I'm very happy with this final comp. The next step for us is to go ahead and start to comp together the first shot. I'm going to show you an easy way of doing that without having to recreate an entire network. All right, back in scene build _58, this is where we last rendered out our goodies as far as our first shot. And now we're going to render out our first camera. So we rendered out shot 2, now we're going to go back and do shot 1, which is a very small little snippet. The first thing I want to do is I don't want to have any particles, and there's no explosions in this. Again, we're just going to render out puddles, color code, ground shadow, mask, and body. And we have to leave all of these settings as is right now. Now to render this out real quick, all we got to do is go to our render globals. And instead of rendering through camera 2, we render through camera 1. And instead of doing start frame 143, we do start frame 1 and frame 142. Now one thing that we have to change, before we forget, if I go ahead and go to camera 1 here, and if I go to view, I can say select camera, and if we don't forget this, and we will forget it, if you go under camera plane, we have to make sure that display mode of the image back there is off. So I want to make sure this is off. And the final thing that we have to tweak here is under our hypershade for our matte. So if I go ahead to the matte material, which we created our matte shadows, we have that file that's actually creating indirect lighting and so forth, but it's set up for shot 2. So if I go ahead and double click it, we can see that it's set to shot 1 or shot 2 proxy 001. So instead, I'm going to switch this over to shot 1 and hit enter. So it's using the shot 1 proxy. And then for the frame offset, we set this to 0 because we're dealing with the first shot. So you can see the actual image here popping up. This is getting projected onto this actual ground, and it's lighting and kicking up indirect lighting and so forth, reflections up into the actual harvester. So if we kind of go through the shot here, I can kind of switch over to frame 20. Here's where the actor is right here. So it's very important that you change that, otherwise we're going to have issues. So with that all said, all we have to do now is just come in here and make sure that we've moved those files over, and I'll go ahead and hit batch render, and we'll be ready to go. All right, so what we've gone ahead after the render is I went ahead and took all of the actual shots or folders that were in my render folder, and I dropped them now, not under shot 2 renders, but shot 1 renders. So you can see there's a parallel here between these and this one right here. Again, we don't have on these folders the explosion or the particles because this shot is so quick. But you can see there's definitely a parallel here, and that we can use to our advantage. Do we have to recreate an entire comp for this shot number 1? And the answer is no. What we can do is what most compositors will do, granted they'll use some scripting, repath the actual texture names to go through the pipeline and just change the
length of the frames and the reference of where the frames are going. So we're going to go ahead and do that, sort of use this pipeline to our advantage. So I'm going to go ahead and save the shot underscore 2 underscore comp 13, which was our final approved shot for shot 2. And I'm going to go ahead and save that under live action 3 comp files, and we'll go ahead and call this comp shot underscore 1 underscore comp and hit save. All right, so now we can go ahead and start repathing this stuff. So we'll start at the beginning of the line and work our way around. So here is this file right here, and we're set to 143 to 483. All we have to change in these variables are a couple things here. One, we want to change this to shot 1 instead, and we'll change this to 1 and 142. So go ahead and hit enter. And you'll see something actually pops up here. The other thing we got to do is the mark in and the offset here. We're going to go ahead and set those up. So we'll set this to 1, and we'll set this offset to 0. And while we're at it, let's change our frame range to 142. So now I'm going to go through each and every one of these and change these. So I'm going to, again, just come under here, set this to 1, set this to 142, and set this to 1, set my mark into 1, and my offset to 0. And again, things will be popping up as we go in here. They don't show anything now, but if I move through the shot, you'll start to see it in kind of update. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here and do all of these. All right, so I went ahead and repathed what I could. And as you can see, it's all updating nicely. Now we have to start replacing the plate shot stuff. So if I kind of come through here, I can see here's our plate shot, and we're still stuck at shot 1 here, or shot 2. So this is pretty easy. All I have to do, again, is just to come in here and change this. It's under the same setting, except I change this to 1, and I change this to 142, and hit enter. And now we should see a nice update in there. So we just switched it over. So kind of moving along here, I'm going to look for, again, some plate stuff. And under foreground actor, here is our proxy with the actual Targa file with the transparency. I went ahead and created inside of After Effects a file that does the mask for the first shot, and it's repeat of information, but I do have the comp available under the After Effects folder. So if you want to take a look at that, you can. So we're just going to have to repath this again, and it's in there. So shot 1 proxy 142. And you can see it right here, and it will update. There is an actual opacity when he looks around the corner. And let's go ahead and just kind of come through our shot here and see if there's anything that we need to get rid of. And I'd say the first thing is this right here, this particle. So I can go ahead and hold down Alt and pop that out. And I can go ahead and delete that because we're not adding any particles in. The explosions, I can hold down Alt and pull that out nicely. This is like the game of Operation, if you guys remember that game, that board game. And just pull that out. So with everything set, we should just double check and make sure everything is looking right in the comp. So I'm going to come all the way to the end here and hold down 1 for the final shot. And let's go ahead and take a look and see what we get. So I kind of pull through here. And here's the transparency, as you can see here. And look, everything is looking nice. You'll see some kind of gritty around the edge here. That's just it kind of rendering and figuring it out. But everything looks pretty good. I might want to blur up my puddles a little bit. They look a little too intense. So under the puddles, for the blur, I could increase this to say something like 3, just to give more of a Gaussian blur. I could also bring down the transparency of it because it looks a little too hot. There we go. All right, so let's kind of just peruse through the shot and see how everything looks. Again, we got full motion blur on, so this should really start to render through pretty quick. And there's only a few shots where we actually see it, so kind of come to the very, very end here, see what we get. So I'm actually pretty happy with this. So let's go ahead and render it out, and let's take a look at it. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and jump over to our output for render. And again, this is really nice. Everything's set up. All we have to do is change one variable, which is shot 1 finished, and go ahead and hit enter. And then we'll just come up here under render and make sure that everything is set up, frames 1 to 141. And I think we'll just go ahead and, if we want to, we can get an extra frame there, but I'm not really too concerned with it. And let's go ahead and start rendering. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at our F check, and we can tell there's something weird going on. We get this weird cross dissolve kind of darkening, and then this weird popping of the image in the beginning here. So what exactly is that? Well, if we look back into our comp from what we were working on shot 2, we were doing a little on-off compositing, which is right here. So this was the on-off, go the animation of the actual harvester to fix that issue with the foreground shovel going in front of our actor. So we can go ahead and hold down Alt. We can delete that. And if we come over here to our CC Basics, we have animation here. So if I go to the CC Basics and kind of take a look under our midtones, here's that gain color correct issue that happened there. So in order to fix that, we just go ahead and say, come in here and say cut animation, and everything should be good. So we kind of double check. Again, I'll set my output to 1, and let's just go ahead and just double check on these, and we shouldn't have any issue now coming through here. And I think it's looking good. It's taking a while to comp in. Again, you'll get those fringed edges when it's trying to calculate, so don't freak out when you see that. Just wait a few seconds, and it'll kind of comp in. So with that, I'm pretty confident we have a good render. So again, I'll just come back under here, under rendering, and we'll just relap over these same actual images. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at these comp together. Here's shot 1, get that nice motion blur. And again, we'll jump over to a little bit of a jump cut to shot 2. I would like to thank E3D, and I'd like to thank Jay Peters for helping me out. He's the guy who volunteered his time to play the soldier. And we also like to thank evike.com for donating for free the Airsoft grenade launcher. I hope you've learned a lot from all of these lessons and that you can apply it towards your projects in the future. So long.